Sporting Journal Radio, presented by OnX.
My parents built a cabin in northwest Wisconsin years ago, not too far from the Danbury and Webster and Luck, that area there, Frederick, not too far from the Twin Cities. And occasionally we'll drive up north of that area, and every time we go up there, my dad always points out and says, "Hey, that's where that Jordan buck was shot." And I'd nod and I'd say, I wish we'd see deer like that nowadays. The Jordan buck was a world record buck taken by Jim Jordan in 1914. This is the 100th anniversary of this monster, and the story about it is being retold. Now, to tell us more about this story, I went to Burnett County to talk to Mike Kornmann. Mike, how are things?
Things are great here in Burnett County, home of the Jim Jordan buck.
How big was that Jordan buck?
I tell you, what's most impressive about those antlers is the mass of the antlers. The antlers at the midway up the antlers still are over 7 inches in circumference. It's incredible, and I mean it's almost the size of a pop can in circumference. That's really how wide it is. And then you add the main beams in length; they're 30 inches. In length, and it's absolutely gigantic, it's one of those perfect storm bucks. Everything had to come together right: genetics, nutrition, and all those things for that buck to get that big. It's incredible.
And we're talking about that magical 200-inch typical whitetail. What did that rack end up scoring?
The official final net score was 206 and an eighth, with only a little over a point deduction, which is also amazing because it's very, very symmetric, and there's very few bucks that have that kind of symmetry in the rack as well, and that's also very amazing.
Jim Jordan shot this buck in 1914. He didn't realize just how big of a buck it was. He just knew, how much it weighed?
Yeah, well, I think, it was in that era, people didn't pull out their iPhone and take a selfie, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I think it was pretty much, when he pretty much just guessed how much it weighed and added a few pounds in there to make the story sound good. But it was a gigantic buck, I'm guessing probably around 250 pounds. But it was a gigantic buck all the way around.
Now, he shot it about a quarter mile from his farm. Whereabouts is this location? Are we giving out the location, or are we still?
Oh yeah.
Hiding it from?
Actually, we're promoting it very well. Jim Jordan's house is on the edge of Danbury. Danbury's about 30 miles east of Hinckley. It's Highway 77 on the Wisconsin side, and he took the railroad tracks south of town. The railroad tracks today is a state bike trail called the Gandy Dancer Trail, and it runs down from Danbury to St. Croix Falls. And him and his friend Ekis Davis went down the railroad there about a mile down the road and walked into the woods and worked back towards town. And he ended up shooting the buck right in some tall grass along the railroad. The buck had jumped up. He'd been tracking it, and a train whistle blew coming into Danbury and spooked the deer. He jumped up, took 3 shots with his Winchester lever action 25-20 caliber, and ran across the railroad tracks and down by the Yellow River. And he tracked it down there one more time and took one last final shot at it on the far side, north side of the Yellow River banks. And that's where it fell. And today, we have officially developed a self-guided hiking tour. You can walk the trail and experience and relive Jim Jordan's legendary hunt along the now Gandy Dancer Trail.
Oh, very cool. I didn't realize that you'd actually be able to follow in the footsteps
Yeah, we have. This fall there'll be a self-guided walking tour map, and you can walk along on the Jordan Buck Heritage Hike. It's a great family thing to do, and you can relive that legendary hunt and see from the bridge over the Yellow River right where the Jordan Bucks fell. I mean, how often do you get to relive a legendary hunt like that?
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, I've never heard of that before. I don't know if that's something. Is that pretty unique? Where did you get the idea for that?
Well, there's that long story of long route it took to actually become the world record, and to have this all happen right adjacent to a railroad grade, which is now a bike trail. It's just made for the story, to relive it, share it for generations to come.
Mike,
now people can do that.
And I want to talk about the story of what happened after the buck was shot here in just a second. But let's get back to this self-guided walking tour a little bit, where you can actually follow the hunt and walk in the footsteps. Can I carry my rifle with when I do that? Because I'm hoping, tell me there's still some genetics from the Jordan buck running around those woods somewhere.
I'm sure the genetics are. Hunting's not allowed on the Gandy Dancer Trail, but I tell you what, there's 100,000 acres of public land in the area, and it wouldn't surprise me if there is another Jordan buck out there. Periodically, you hear stories about a gray ghost wandering around the woods of just magnificent proportions, and it always gives me this wonder. It's like, wait a minute. Another one could be out there.
Oh, man.
And that's what keeps me going every year. I tell you what, that's why I'm out there in the Burnett County Forest and Governor Knowles Forest. I'm out there with my bow and with my 270 during gun deer season. And because, I know for me, I'm a passionate deer hunter, and I'm always looking for my Jordan buck.
Absolutely. Tell us the story, Mike, of what happened after Jim Jordan shot this world record.
Well, immediately after, he needed help because his friend was dealing with a doe that they shot earlier in the hunt, so he went into town to get some help. He came back, and the buck was gone. Can you imagine that, shooting a buck like that, and it was gone? And it must have flopped one more time. The 25-20 caliber gun is really kind of a pop gun, and they looked downstream 100 yards, and there it was, hung up on a rock. I mean, I tell you, I would have been out of my mind to come back to that. Well, Jim Jordan, he gave this buck over to a taxidermist in Webster, Wisconsin. And, of course, this is 1914. There wasn't a bridge over the St. Croix River west of Danbury, between Danbury and Hinckley. Just travel from Danbury to Webster was 7 miles away. That was a big trip.
Yeah, so you're telling me that hole in the wall wasn't there then? There was no
it was not. I'm still looking for some pictures from 1914 Danbury, because that would be quite the sight. The taxidermist moves to Hinckley without notifying Jim Jordan and completes the taxidermy work, and is out of communication with Jim Jordan, so he was needed to move. I think there were some health issues with his spouse, and so he put the Jordan buck neck mount up in his attic, and it wasn't found until later in the 60s. And the people who own the house, they put it out on a table at a rummage sale.
Oh boy!
And and they, of course, it was a big buck, but didn't think much of it. They found it in an attic. And so what was really interesting is a very distant relative of Jim Jordan's, Bob Ludwig, saw the buck and purchased it. And through the communication as a family, all of a sudden they heard the story about this, that Bob Ludwig had this buck, and Jim Jordan finally got over to take a look at it. He's like, "Oh my God, that's my buck!" And so it started coming back, and eventually the antlers, or the buck, was sold to another person out east. And I think it was late 60s or so. Officially, the Minnesota in Minnesota, they officially scored the rack. They didn't know who the hunter was at the time, so they scored the rack, and it originally came up with a score of 206 5/8, and they noticed the math error, and then it got corrected to 206 1/8, and it was recorded, and this is the Minnesota connection to the Jim Jordan buck. It was originally recorded as Minnesota record buck, world record.
Oh, really?
Hunter unknown, but it was known as the Sandstone buck, Sandstone, Minnesota, because that's where the house is actually located with the taxidermist. So originally as a Sandstone buck, unknown hunter, and that's where it stood for a number of years. And so that's it's still, like any good hunting story, people want to, was it picked up? Was it fun? Did someone shoot this? And people really wanted to know. People were curious, but just nothing was done. No one really knew the story on it. So there it sat for a number of years.
So this was actually listed as a Minnesota world record deer for a long time.
Yeah, for a number of years. How it really came back to Minnesota is the guy by the name of Ron Shera, who I think everyone's familiar with, was curious. He saw in the record book Hunter Unknown. He did a little research and started interviewing people, and that kind of led him to Jim Jordan and his family members, and he wrote about that story in 1977 in Outdoor Life magazine, and eventually all that research started coming to light, and the Boone and Crockett Club and the guys at the Wisconsin Buck and Bear Club started pulling together the information to put together a case that Jim Jordan was the hunter on what we now know as the Jim Jordan buck.
It's an amazing story, and just a monster deer. Where could somebody see it on display today?
Today, all you have to do is jump right across the river over in the Grantsburg, Wisconsin, at the Crex Meadows Education Center on the north side of town. It's a really good place to take kids and learn about the outdoors. They have a replica shoulder rack there, and you'll be able to really see how large that rack is, because when you see it in pictures, it just doesn't do the buck justice.
Well, that's great. Is there someplace we can find a list of those festivities, maybe online, or find out more information about those?
Yeah, all you have to do is Google Jordan Buck Centennial or go to BurnettCounty.com/JordanBuck100. That's BurnettCounty.com/JordanBuck100.
Mike Kornmann, University of Wisconsin, Burnett County, thank you for being here. I'm telling us the story of the famous world record Jordan buck. Because now there's actually a bigger buck now, right, on the world record. It's not quite the world record anymore, but it's got to be close. It's
the Hansen buck took the record in 1993. The Jordan buck is still the USA record buck, and that's still amazing that there's only one buck in 100 years. There's only one buck that's larger, and it's still the record, USA record buck, with all the wildlife management we have, all that we know about deer management, all these things. This buckshot in 1914 is still the USA record. That tells you something about Mother Nature.
And who says you need to go to southeast Minnesota or southwest Wisconsin to shoot big bucks?
That's right. They're
northwest Wisconsin, apparently.
That's right.
All right, Mike, thank you for all the information.
No problem, Brett.
Hear more at sportingjournalradio.com or wherever you get podcasts. 852 million acres of public land, 147 million private properties, all in the palm of your hand. The #1 hunting GPS app just got better. With hundreds of custom map layers, 3D and topographic maps, you can easily scout on the road or at home before you go. And now you can get important weather details, CWD detection, and even know what crops have been planted where. Get the most trusted hunting GPS app ever made. OnX. Know where you stand with OnX.